Okay, we better move along. We're cutting our time now, so I'd like to now welcome Jack Asher, General Manager of Research and Policy from RAI, to give us a bit of some findings on the Stocktake of Regional Research. Thanks, Jack.
A good metaphor or perhaps indication of what we're dealing with when we think about regional research, change and development. We've had Graham talk about some of the work we've got going, looking at broad trends, changes and things that are happening throughout our regions. And then we've had a look at a very practical innovation, which is also an example of local entrepreneurship, which leads directly to regional development, as well as something that can impact heavily on services, which we also know from Graham's work is very important for attracting and keeping people in regions. So it all ties together, I think, in an interesting way. And at RAI, we've been grappling with how we knit that together at a national level, what we already know about regions and how they're changing, and what we can do to make things better in the future. The particular challenge, I think, for us is to give governments and regions the confidence to understand the complexity of the things that they're faced with, and to act to try and make things better, despite the fact that regions are dynamic places, that they're changing very fast and that we can't control everything that happens in the future. But I want to talk to you today about our Stocktake of Research. It's our first large initiative, and we've heard a little bit about it already today. But I think there's some findings from the process which are really important for people to understand. People are interested in regional research, people are interested in how we engage in some of these issues and achieve change. The purpose of the project was to get a better understanding of what we already know. And I think that's been mentioned a couple of times today. At this point, I probably should acknowledge the team from Marsden Jacobs who were kind enough to help us with the project and did a lot of hard work. We've been through tens of thousands of pieces of research. We've identified hundreds of data sets, all of which are trying to contribute something to regional debate and discussion. We've made them more available to people in universities like Charles Sturt, in regions like the Riverina, in policy positions throughout federal government. They're now available they were available before, but they're now much easier to connect with through the site that we've got together for RAI. But we've also thought a little bit about what the whole stock of research tells us. The diversity of information, the diversity of activity that's taking place throughout regional Australia at regional universities like Charles Sturt here, and in practical places like we've just seen with the demonstration. Because I think we need to understand, while diversity is great, where are we going? What are we doing, and are we building over time the fundamental information, knowledge and energy that we need to actually kind of achieve the change that we want for the future? So let me just take you through a couple of high-level findings from the work, and I really wanted to set up a discussion. We've got some very knowledgeable people from locally and from our RAI network to come and give their views on how they think we resolve these problems. But I just wanted to share a few of the insights we've got from the process. And I should say that the more detailed work's available on our website, and it's well worth a read. There's some quite detailed reports looking at quite specific opportunities and things that RAI is going to be looking at, and things that organisations like CSU I think will be interested in. But this slide shows the top 15 topics of regional research in the last decade. Out of the 1,500 pieces of research we've identified as really being closely related to regional development, these are the top 15 areas. Interestingly, you can see that health's very important. You can see that Indigenous issues have had a lot of effort. 15% of the research we identified has been related to that topic. You can see the economy, you can see population, you can see all the topics you'd expect. And so we're doing a lot of work. We knew that. The question is, how are we knitting this together? how are we translating all the diversity of this work into information that people can use practically. And, you know, we went through a process in the Stocktake of talking to people in policy roles, talking to researchers, and despite of all of this great research that's going on, there's a real challenge in connecting it together, building an agenda out of it, and making sure that the knowledge that's being developed over time in our institutions is available and being used by policymakers. One of the things we're grappling with at RAI is when you look at the diversity of issues and you try and knit this together, and I know that Lani and people who work at the regional level have the same issue. You know, how do you knit the sort of the great mass of information on issues together into something coherent that can energise people and can actually lead to change? And so that's a real challenge, and I think something we need to think about as well as doing more research on issues. I think the other major finding which is worth thinking about is the way we're orientating our work. And Adrian mentioned at the start some of the traditional long-standing challenges we've had in regional Australia, and we do work on these, and we make progress and we overcome them, and they come back. But what the research has shown is that, and Mal mentioned this earlier, is that we're not doing enough work on opportunities. We're not doing enough work on potential. We're not doing enough work on how regions can change and grow. We're at times getting stuck in the problems that we face, and I think we really need to think about whether that's a good thing for the future or whether it doesn't create an unnecessary image that regions struggle more than they do. I think this is also an opportunity in itself, because people involved in regional issues know that there's amazing opportunities, there's amazing things happening in regional Australia, but are we capturing this and are we presenting it to government so that they understand that there's growth, they understand that international people are coming and making their lives in regional Australia? I don't think that our research is doing enough of that kind of work, and so we get back not as much as we should from people who are trying to make decisions on behalf of regions. And the other thing that this graph shows is that the policymakers are interested. You know, we often talk about government being against us or just not particularly focused on regions, but the people we spoke to frustrated or just, you know, looking for more of those positive stories and grounding that in really good research and information that gives it some substance and enables you to make decisions. And so people involved in research at Charles Sturt University, and a whole diversity of the topics, you know, it's worth thinking about how we connect with organisations like RDAs, how we connect with organisations like us at RAI, and bring those pieces of work together into a bigger picture so we can get some change. So what do you do with all that? We're thinking hard. We've been having robust debate amongst the group during this week about how we can make a contribution. So I said earlier, we're trying to knit things together and present them more coherently at a national level, not overriding the diversity of things that's happening in the region, but trying to make sense out of that so that people in policy positions have the confidence to make good decisions. The thing that struck me out of the Stocktake is I don't think we've got the fundamentals right, and Andrew Beer mentioned offhand this morning that you know, some of our basic information on regions is quite poor, and so even though there's a lot of data and there's a lot of information, we're not able to use that, we're not able to access it, and so we have to think hard about whether those fundamental things that you need for a policy area to work well, for people to understand what's happening, are really in place. We're thinking hard about that through our competitiveness index, which Sandra mentioned, and how we can bring things together. I think the biggest contribution that RAI can make is to knit things together. We'll come up with a few of our own good ideas, I hope, but if we can synthesise and knit things together, I think we can make a real contribution. But I'd encourage people to think about whether the research they're doing at Charles Sturt and other places, how that impacts on the fundamentals for regions and how that might show the way towards a better basic understanding of what's happening in regions and how that can be understood at a wider level. the other consequence of this is that John Tamani spoke at our early forum about the great work that's being done in OECD and overseas, which has really changed and challenged some of those assumptions you have about growth and change in regions and what's happening. But because we're missing those fundamentals, the OECD work stops at the state level in Australia, and so it doesn't. Haven't yet had the opportunity to test how much those international findings, which are part of the developed world, really apply and where they apply and what the Australian story of that is. And there's some real opportunities, I think, in taking that work and translating it for the Australian context, because that kind of work is changing the debate overseas and can help us change the debate here as well. The other area to think about is the one I've mentioned before, which is about that focus on opportunities. So I've spoken a little bit about that. We're thinking about processes. How do things change? And I think people in the room probably know more about that than I do from where you've been and where you're working on. So how do we bring the case studies and things that you already know about together with RAI? Sandra mentioned pitch an idea. Tell us about what you think could work in this context, and we'd appreciate hearing about that.